Welcome back to another year of Final Fantasy, and we're in the month of
Diablos.
Last time we finished up with the Game Boy Final Fantasy Legends series, and this time we're still gonna stay in the realm of handhelds just for a little bit longer, so we can talk about Final Fantasy Explorers. But before we do that, let's go over our first job of the video, and this is gonna be the Summoner. I've already talked about the Summoner quite in depth in the past, and we have a Summoner sub-series that's going on that's actually going to be appearing really soon. But for those new here, or just for a refresher, the Summoner is a type of mage in the series that's gotten more and more attention as the time goes on. Summons are a really big part of Final Fantasy. Summoners' main focus is that they can call upon incarnations of magical beings to do devastating attacks, usually in a very flamboyant way. Summoners sometimes wield a bit of either black or white magic, but that's not really the main focus of that class. Alright, so I'll leave the Summoner stuff alone for now, but we do have some more Summoner videos coming up very soon, so let's go ahead and move on and talk about some Final Fantasy Explorers. Explorers is a pretty recent game published by Square Enix for the Nintendo 3DS system. It released in Japan on December 18th of 2014, and roughly a year later or so, it released in the States on January 26th of 2016. With a collector's edition that was offered, which I immediately snatched up, and I'm really glad I did. So, the collector's edition comes with a very sturdy box featuring some gorgeous artwork from Amano. Obviously the game comes in it, of course, and a soundtrack with 20 of the game's songs. They call it a sampler. 3DS Collector's hardshell case comes in it, and a limited edition art book. This was only available through Square Enix's online store, not in GameStop or wherever you pre-order your games. The real value here is the case and the art book, which I cannot overstate how just amazing it is. You also get some legendary weapons for in-game, as you might expect with other pre-orders from, I don't know, just any game. But enough of that, what exactly is Final Fantasy Explorers? Well, it's certainly a departure from the traditional games in the way that the game is structured, as far as progression goes, and the way battles are fought. Up to 4 people can play together over Wi-Fi or the internet, and you team up to accomplish specific goals and quests, attaining new gear to progress in a very expansive job system. It doesn't really play like Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles though. The jobs here are the ones that you would expect from a Final Fantasy game. There are 21 in all, which is quite a lot, and you can expect your favorites here, as well as some of the jobs that don't often appear in the Final Fantasy series, at least very often, like the Sage or the Geomancer. So let's get to the real meat of this game, and that's the combat. Most of the game is with combat. It has very light story sprinkled throughout, which is pretty much the opposite of what you would expect a Final Fantasy game to have. The game is controlled in real time, and each class has various abilities and weapons that they can use better than other classes, as you would expect. The easiest way to possibly explain the battle system is to look at Monster Hunter. In fact, as much as I love this game, there can be no doubt that Explorers essentially Final Fantasy-ized, I guess if that's a word, the Monster Hunter game. It's a derivative in that way, but that does not mean that it's bad at all. Quite the contrary, it's one of my favorite games from the past few years. For those that don't know what Monster Hunter is, it's a real-time game focused solely on battles. You battle, you kill monsters, you get material from those monsters to create better and better armor. That's how the progression goes. In a sense, there's no real levels in Monster Hunter, and this game follows that path as well. It's a huge departure from a Final Fantasy game. The difference in Explorers is the focus of quests. They aren't always huge monsters, whereas Monster Hunter is, well, Monster Hunter. There are always big monsters and grand battles. So Final Fantasy Explorers does differentiate itself in that regard, but other than that, pretty much all of it's similar. In Monster Hunter, your weapon choice dictates your playstyles, and it's certainly not a hack and slash game in any sense. Final Fantasy Explorers kind of follows that idea, but it's a little bit more hack and slashy, whereas in Monster Hunters you had every weapon acting uniquely. Here you can augment your fighting style by different abilities that you're going to learn in different ways through combat. It's actually mind-boggling how much you can customize the characters in this way with their abilities, especially taking into account the 21 classes. This game is jam-packed with hundreds and hundreds of hours of content. Alright, let's take take a little step aside and talk about another class, one of my all-time favorites, alongside the Red Mage, and that is the Time Mage. Time Mages are iconic for Final Fantasy, but the frequency, pun intended I guess, of their appearance in the series makes it a little bit more like a B-tier class in that respect. Time Mages control space and time. Usually they are a debuff enhanced class, casting things like haste, stop, slow, that kind of stuff. It's what you would expect from a Time Mage. However, they do also wield more direct space-themed magic such as meteor, comet, gravity, similar spells like that. We'll go into Time Mage much more in depth in an upcoming video, but there's your teaser. Alright, let's talk a little bit more about some Final Fantasy Explorers. Multiplayer is a pretty big component here, as it is in Monster Hunter, though it's not required at all. So in that respect, you get to team up with 3 of your other friends if, you all have the game, and it's your little own version of the world. The game isn't really an MMO at all in that respect. We got the Final Fantasy MMOs coming, oh my god, way later down the line. Anyway, me personally, I get a pretty heavy Phantasy Star Online vibe when I play this game. PSO is one of my favorite games ever, so that's probably a huge driving factor for my love for this game. There's also a ton of different little fan service moments in this game that I could go into, but the video can only be so long. So I'll briefly mention the story, and pretty much that's all the story gives you. It's a very brief narrative. So the pitch here is that you're basically on an island with a bunch of crystals, which as you know are a huge part of Final Fantasy. And those crystals have these elemental aspects about them, and you're going to fight the Eidolons, your classic summon monsters for lack of a better word. And they're here guarding these crystals, and you want the crystals, so you gotta kill the monsters, basically. There are a bunch of different people here with differing factions. If you talk to them over and over, you kind of get the sense of the outside world beyond this island, but that's pretty much all there is to it for most of the game. And these outside groups want to get these crystals, and there's a mythical grand crystal for themselves. And that's honestly about it as far as the story goes. And honestly, you don't even really need the story to get the full fulfillment from the game. So at this point we talk about the music, and it's not from Uematsu. Uematsu in the more recent games doesn't really play a huge role at Square Enix anymore. He kind of does his own thing, as we've talked about in the Uematsu video. The music here was composed by Tsuyoshi Sakaido? Sorry if I mispronounced that. The music here is good, but sadly it's forgettable as there's no real catchy kind of Final Fantasy tunes. At least the ones that I've heard. So while we wrap this up, I have to speak out for the game. As far as I can tell, everyone on the internet at large had this game fly under their radar. Pretty much nobody knows about it. Most people that do know about it, or those that do mention it, talk about it, favorably generally, and rightly so. Like I said, this game is actually incredibly good, and it's really sad that it didn't get the fanfare of any other Final Fantasy game, even the other spin-offs. This game was not marketed very well. But for those that did get it, you know that you have a ridiculous amount of content here, and the playtime that it can offer is staggering. It's sad that it didn't get more recognition, but hopefully, in whatever way I can, this video may inspire some of you to go out and check it out. It's definitely worth your time. On the next year of Final Fantasy, in the month of Diablos, I'm going to be looking at Summons Part 3. Told you it was coming really soon. So until next time, Crystal Warrior, keep on gaming.